spake of Christ's suffering and of the sovereignty and of the glory that is to come when Christ comes as king to the earth to establish his kingdom. The Spirit of Christ, which was in them, did signify. This tells us specifically that the prophets of the Old Testament wrote by the Spirit of Christ. This is one of the many statements contained in the Word of God declaring that the Old Testament was inspired of God. These men wrote by the Spirit of God. The prophet wrote some things which they themselves did not get grasp. They searched for meaning diligently, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify. Then it testified beforehand the suffering of Christ and the glory that should follow. There are many places in the Old Testament that speak of the suffering of Christ, and there are many other places that speak of the sovereignty of Christ and of the kingdom age. Grace and glory are combined, and it was difficult for them to understand this. For example, Isaiah wrote in the 53rd chapter of the suffering of Christ. In the 11th chapter, he wrote of the Messiah coming in power and glory to the earth to establish his kingdom. This seeming contradiction was very puzzling to the prophets, and they tried to find out how both could be true. As the prophets looked down the corridor of time, they saw these two events as two great mountain peaks, but they could not see the valley of time between them. You and I are in a unique position of living in that interval of time between the suffering of Christ, which is past, and the glory of Christ, which is in the future. It will help you to understand the prophecies of the suffering and sovereign Christ if you picture the two events as two great mountain peaks. Here in Pasadena, again, this is McGee and not me, we have a backdrop of the Sierra Madre Mountains. As the crow flies, they are about 5 miles away because he's in Pasadena, by the way. I looked it up on the map whenever we came to this when I was studying it last night. But driving the winding road to get there makes them about 25 miles away. Mount Wilson is in the foreground and is approximately 6,000 feet high. Behind that peak, we can see another peak, Mount Waterman, which looks as if it is the same height as Mount Wilson. Actually, Mount Waterman is over 8,000 feet high. However, it looks as if they are the same height and that they are right together. In actual fact, they are not together at all. A tremendous valley separates them between the 25th and the 35th, 35 miles across. And I estimate that it is probably 15 miles from one mountain peak to another, yet seeing them from a distance, you would think they were right together. In fact, I think there was a highway that ran between them, Route 23 or something like that. Whenever I looked it up on the map, in just uh, such a way, the prophets looking into the future saw the suffering Christ and the glory of Christ as two mountain peaks which appeared to be right together. And I am of the opinion that there were skeptics of a higher criticism in those days who argued this is a conflict. The scriptures are in contradiction. You cannot have it both ways. Either he comes in suffering or he comes to reign. Of course, we know now that both are true, and the valley between is the church age, which already is approaching 2,000 years. in length. And that concludes that section.